It's 2:14 a.m. at Rusty's Donuts in suburban New Jersey. A 7-foot, one giant weighing 325 pounds walks through the door. He has to duck his head to clear the ceiling. This is Shaquille O'Neal. He has 4 NBA rings and a $400 million fortune. But tonight, he is wearing a cheap, $20 tracksuit. He came to buy 12 donuts for a kid's shelter. Suddenly, a local gang leader named Tyrell slams into Shaq's shoulder. The box of donuts hits the floor. Tyrell yells, "You're taking up too much space, big man." He has no idea he is facing a man with a PhD and 28,000 career points. Shaq stays silent. He looks calmly at the $14.22 pile of crushed donuts. Can his silence defeat the anger of the streets? 3 hours earlier, Shaq lay awake in a bed built for a normal man. His right knee throbbed like a drum. 7 surgeries had left scars up and down that joint. He heard the bones click when he rolled onto his side. It was 1:30 in the morning and sleep would not come. His house had 12 bedrooms. He only used one. It was a small room, just 20 square meters, tucked near the kitchen. The big rooms felt cold and empty to him. This small room felt safe, like a closet he could hide inside. He got up and walked to the kitchen. His feet were bare on the tile floor. He pulled out a coffee mug the size of a small bucket. Then he grabbed a tiny spoon, the kind made for a child's cereal bowl, and stirred his coffee slow and careful. It was a strange sight. A giant using a spoon built for a toddler. Steam rose from the mug, curling up toward the ceiling in slow, lazy spirals. He stared out the dark window, watching his own faint reflection layered over the black shapes of trees outside. Somewhere far off, a dog barked once and went quiet again, the only sound breaking the stillness of the early morning hour. Somewhere out there, in a world with normal-sized doors and normal-sized chairs, people were sleeping in warm beds. He never quite felt like he fit anywhere. Not in this house. Not in most rooms he entered. He had learned to live folded up, like a man trying not to take too much space in a world too small for him. His knee throbbed again. He rubbed it gently and thought about nothing in particular. Just the quiet hum of the refrigerator. Just the coffee going cold in his hands. This was his life now, 5 years after retirement. Rich, famous, and mostly alone at night. He walked back down the hallway, past framed jerseys and photos from arenas that used to roar his name. The house stayed quiet now. No teammates joking in the next room. No coaches yelling plays. Just his own footsteps echoing off marble floors built for parties that rarely happened anymore. He passed a mirror near the staircase and stopped for a second. The man looking back at him seemed older than his birth certificate said. Gray hairs near his temples, deep lines around his eyes, from years of squinting under bright arena lights. His body still carried the shape of a champion, but his joints told a different story every single morning. Sleep had never come easy since retirement. Doctors told him this was normal. The body gets used to a schedule, then the schedule disappears, and the body doesn't know what to do with the extra hours. So he wandered his own house at night, mug in hand. He listened to a silence that used to scare him, but now felt almost like an old friend. Then his phone rang. The screen lit up the dark kitchen. It said, "Sister Beatrice, Little Pebbles Shelter." He picked up on the second ring. "Sister B, it's late. Everything okay?" Her voice was shaking. "Shaquille, I am so sorry to call at this hour. Our freezer broke tonight. Every scrap of breakfast food for the children spoiled. I have 42 kids waking up in 5 hours with nothing to eat." Shaq sat down at his kitchen table. The wood creaked under his weight. "Did the power go out?" "No, just the freezer motor. It's an old unit. I should have replaced it months ago, but the budget never allowed it." Sister Beatrice paused. He could hear her trying to hold back tears. "I'm not calling to ask you for money, Shaquille. I just needed to say it out loud to someone. I don't know what to do at 2 in the morning." She wasn't asking for a check. She wasn't asking for anything at all. She just needed a voice in the dark. That hit him harder than any request for cash ever could. "Sister B, listen to me," Shaq said. "Those kids are going to have breakfast. I promise you that. You don't have to do this yourself. You could send someone. I know I don't have to." His voice was calm and steady. "But I'm going to." He hung up the phone and sat in the quiet kitchen for a moment. Then he walked to his garage, past the sports cars covered in soft cloth, past the SUV, with tinted windows, all the way to the back corner. There sat a beat-up 2002 Ford F-150. The paint was faded gray. One mirror was held on with tape. It was the only vehicle in the garage that nobody would look at twice. He climbed in, and the whole truck sank 3 inches lower. Before starting the engine, Shaq caught his own reflection in the rearview mirror. He looked tired, older than he felt inside. For 1 second, he almost reached for his phone instead of his keys. A quick transfer of $5,000 would solve the shelter's problem just as fast. He could send it and go back to bed. Nobody would ever know the difference. His eyes drifted down, under his bed frame at the edge of the garage light, to an old shoebox he kept there. Inside were his first pair of basketball shoes, worn thin, size 23, laces frayed to nothing. He had grown up in Newark without much. Those shoes reminded him what money could never buy. Money could not show up at 2 a.m. Money could not stand in a parking lot in the cold. Money could not look Sister Beatrice in the eye and say, "I've got this." He thought about all the times money had solved problems for him growing up. Or rather, all the times it hadn't existed to solve anything at all. His mother, Lucille, used to stretch a single grocery bag across an entire week. She never once made him feel poor, even when the lights got shut off. She made him feel loved, and loved felt like enough. That was the lesson buried deep under everything he had built since then. People didn't remember what you gave them. They remembered whether you showed up. Presence mattered. Being there mattered. He grabbed his keys. As he backed out of the driveway, an old memory floated up, clear as if it happened yesterday. He was 13 years old, already taller than every grown man on his street. 3 older boys had cornered him, after school, calling him a freak, shoving him against a fence. He remembers going home, that day, shaking with anger, ready to hit somebody. His stepfather, Sergeant Philip Harrison, was sitting at the kitchen table when Shaq walked in. Philip could read his face like a book. "Somebody push you around today?" Philip asked, setting down his newspaper and looking his stepson straight in the eye. Shaq nodded, jaw tight. "You want to know what to do about it?" "Beat them up," Shaq said. "I could break both their arms." Philip shook his head slowly. He reached over and put a heavy hand on Shaq's shoulder. "The strongest man in the room isn't the one who can bend the most people. It's the one who can bend the lowest and never lose who he is." Shaq didn't understand it then. He was too angry, too young. But the words stuck to him like glue, year after year, until they became part of how he walked through the world. Stand tall to protect, not to threaten. Bend low, but never break your own dignity. Philip Harrison had never raised his voice much, not even during the hardest years. He worked long shifts and came home tired. He still found time to sit at that kitchen table every night and talk with his stepson. He never had much money to give, but he gave something harder to find: steady attention, night after night, without fail. "People are going to underestimate you your whole life," Philip told him once. "Some because you're too big, some because you're too quiet. Let them. The ones who matter will figure it out eventually." Shaq carried that kitchen table conversation with him for the rest of his life. It followed him into every arena, every business deal, and every quiet act of kindness performed without a camera nearby. Philip had passed away years ago, but his voice still showed up in moments like this one, guiding a truck through empty streets toward a broken freezer and 42 hungry children. He drove through empty streets, past shuttered stores and flickering streetlights. Rusty's Donuts sat on a corner with a faded sign and a light left on for early risers. He pulled into the lot and parked at an angle, the way big trucks always do. Inside, the shop smelled like old grease and burnt sugar. The tile floor was cracked in 3 places. A single fluorescent light buzzed above the register, flickering every few seconds like it might give out completely. Behind the counter stood a 19-year-old named Leo, eyes red from lack of sleep, hands trembling slightly as he counted change into the register. Leo worked the graveyard shift because it paid $2 more an hour, and $2 mattered when you were saving for community college tuition. He kept a small bag of loose bills tucked under the register, money he had been setting aside from tips for almost a year now. $311, counted and recounted more times than he could remember. He hated the graveyard shift for one simple reason. This corner of town belonged to men like Tyrell after midnight, and everybody who worked here knew it. The owner had been robbed twice in the last 2 years. Leo had learned to keep his eyes down and his voice quiet whenever the door chimed after 11 at night. "Help you?" Leo asked, barely looking up. "I need 12 donuts, whatever's fresh," Shaq said, keeping his voice low and easy. Leo rang it up. 1422. Shaq handed over cash and waited, while Leo boxed the donuts with careful hands. The bell above the door jingled. Cold air rushed in. A man walked in like he owned the place. He was maybe 6 feet tall, wearing a leather jacket and heavy boots, a jagged scar running from his left eyebrow down to his cheek. This was Tyrell, and everyone on this block knew his name and crossed the street to avoid him. Tyrell didn't see the giant standing near the counter until he was already walking straight through the aisle. His shoulder crashed into Shaq's arm, hard enough to spin him half around. The box of donuts slipped from Shaq's hand and hit the floor. The lid popped open. 12 donuts scattered across the dirty tile, crushed under the weight of the fall. Tyrell spun around, chest puffed out, ready for a fight. Then he looked up, and up, and up again, until his eyes found Shaq's face far above him. For half a second, something flickered across Tyrell's expression. Surprise, maybe even a flash of fear. But pride took over fast. "You're taking up too much space, big man," Tyrell snapped, loud enough for the whole shop to hear. Shaq said nothing. He looked down at the donuts scattered on the floor, thick chunks of glazed dough soaking in a small puddle near the door. $14.22, crushed flat. He crouched down, slow and careful, joints aching, and started picking up the pieces one by one. Not out of fear, out of patience. This was for 42 kids who needed breakfast in a few hours. Tyrell watched this giant kneel on the floor and mistook it for weakness. He pulled a small knife from his jacket. Slow and deliberate, he dragged the tip across the wooden counter, carving a shallow line like he was marking territory. "You know what?" Tyrell said. "Guys your size gotta pay a space tax around here. $200 right now." Leo froze behind the register, one hand hovering near a small bag of loose bills he kept hidden under the counter for emergencies. His breathing turned shallow and fast. Shaq stood back up, a full donut box's worth of crushed pastry balanced in his massive hands. He set it gently on the counter. He still hadn't said a word. 2 more men pushed through the door behind Tyrell. One was short and wiry, with restless eyes that never stopped moving. This was Dax. The other was taller, quieter, with tattoos climbing up his neck. This was Silas. They flanked Tyrell like shadows, waiting for a signal. "You gonna pay the tax, or you gonna get on your knees and clean up every last crumb off this floor?" Tyrell asked, tapping the knife against the counter. "Otherwise, maybe I mess up this kid's pretty face instead." He nodded toward Leo, whose eyes went wide with fear. The room went still. Even the old refrigerator behind the counter seemed to hold its hum. Shaq turned his head, slow and deliberate, and looked at Tyrell for the first time since the collision. Not with anger, not with fear, just a long, steady look, calm as still water. His eyes moved to Tyrell's forearm, where a faded tattoo peeked out from under his sleeve. 3 interlocking crowns, the mark of a street crew called the South Street Kings. Shaq had seen that symbol before, years ago, in a very different part of his life. "How much do the Kings make you pay every night?" Shaq asked quietly. His voice was low, almost gentle, but it carried across the whole room. Tyrell blinked, caught off guard. "What? New guys like you," Shaq said. "They squeeze you for around $450 a night, don't they? Whether you make it or not." Tyrell's jaw tightened. Nobody outside the crew was supposed to know numbers like that. "How do you know that?" "I know the streets behind this shop," Shaq said. "I know the men who sleep in the lot 2 blocks over. I know what it costs to survive out here when nobody's giving you a way out." He paused. "I grew up on streets just like these." Something in Tyrell's confidence cracked, just slightly, like a hairline fracture spreading across glass. His grip on the knife loosened for a moment, before he caught himself and tightened it again. Tyrell had grown up on these same streets, in an apartment 3 blocks from where he now stood. He remembered nights when the power got shut off, He remembered his mother working 2 jobs and still falling short on rent, and his little brother catching pneumonia because the heat never worked right. He had joined the South Street Kings at 16 because it seemed like the only door still open to him. He never told anyone how much he hated the nightly payments and the constant fear of falling short. His own crew treated him like a piece of property instead of a person. Standing here now, staring up at this stranger who somehow knew the exact price of his suffering, Tyrell felt something crack open inside his chest. It was something he had kept sealed shut for years. "Doesn't matter where you grew up," Tyrell said, but his voice had lost some of its edge. "You're still in my shop, taking up my space, and you still owe me $200. That's when Dax stepped forward, impatient, sweat beading on his forehead. He reached under his jacket and pulled out a small black pistol, pressing it hard against Shaq's side. "Enough talking," Dax said, his hand shaking slightly. "Pay up, or we do this the hard way." 325 pounds of solid muscle stood perfectly still against the barrel of a 9mm gun. Leo let out a small gasp behind the counter. Tyrell's eyes widened, unsure if his own crew member had just gone too far. Shaq did not flinch. He did not step back. He looked down at Dax's shaking hand, then back up at Tyrell, his voice never rising above a calm, even tone. "Let me tell you a story," Shaq said, "about a giant who once had everything a man could want. For championship rings, more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes, big houses in every state." He paused, letting the words settle in the quiet shop. And one night, he realized the most valuable thing he owned wasn't any of that. It was a $14 box of donuts he was carrying to feed some hungry kids. The shop was silent except for the hum of the old refrigerator and the sound of Dax's breathing. "You think a gun scares me?" Shaq continued, still calm, still steady. "I've stood in front of angrier men than you holding worse things than that. What scares me is a kid growing up thinking a gun is the only power he'll ever have." Tyrell stared at Shaq, something shifting behind his eyes. The knife in his hand lowered, just slightly, toward the counter. Dax's phone buzzed loudly in his pocket, breaking the tension like a snapped wire. He glanced down at it, annoyed, then froze. His face went pale. "Tyrell," Dax said, voice cracking. "It's about your brother." Tyrell snatched the phone from Dax's hand, reading the screen fast, his lips moving silently as he scanned the message. His whole body seemed to sway for a second, like the floor had tilted beneath him. "His hospital bill," Tyrell whispered, mostly to himself. $18,000 for $150.21. It's gone. Somebody paid it off. Anonymous donor. He looked up, confusion written across his face. Who would do that? Nobody answered. But Shaq reached slowly into his jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet. He let it fall open just enough for a small laminated card to slip halfway out. Tyrell's eyes dropped to the card automatically. It read, "Shaquille O'Neal, Doctor of Education." Tyrell's face drained of every ounce of color. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The knife slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the tile floor, right next to the crushed donuts. He had been threatening the exact man who paid to save his own brother's life just 1 week earlier. The room felt like it had dropped 10 degrees. Dax lowered the gun slowly, his hand shaking harder now, unsure what to do with the weight of what had just happened. Tyrell's little brother, Marcus, was only 9 years old. He had been born with a weak heart valve, and every doctor visit came with a bill the family could never quite pay off. Tyrell had picked up extra shifts running packages for the Kings just to keep the lights on and the hospital bills paid. He never imagined that a stranger in a donut shop would turn out to be the reason his brother was still alive. Silas took a step back toward the door, muttering something about this being a mistake, but Dax's eyes had turned greedy instead of scared. He glanced at the wallet still peeking from Shaq's jacket pocket, then at Tyrell, then back at the wallet. "Forget the brother," Dax hissed at Tyrell. "This guy's loaded. We take the wallet and go." "No," Tyrell said, his voice suddenly firm. "Put the gun away, Dax." "Are you serious right now?" Dax snapped. "You're going soft over some rich guy's charity?" Silas grabbed Dax's arm, trying to pull him toward the exit. Dax shook him off hard, stumbling forward a step closer to Shaq, gun still raised but wavering. "You don't get it. Dax said, spit flying from his mouth. Guys like us don't get second chances. We take what we can, when we can, or somebody else takes it first. That's the only rule that ever mattered on these streets. That rule almost got you a bullet in a man's ribs tonight, Tyrell shot back, stepping between Dax and Shaq. And for what? $200? A wallet? You'd throw away everything for a wallet? His voice cracked, with an anger that surprised even himself, the kind that comes from finally seeing your own reflection in someone else's mistake. I'd throw away a lot less than that, Dax muttered, but his voice had lost its conviction. His hand, the one holding the gun, had started to shake harder, the weapon dipping lower with every passing second. Shaq moved then, but not with his fists. He simply shifted his massive body sideways. Using his sheer size and weight, he pressed Dax gently, but firmly against the wall, pinning him without a single punch thrown. The gun clattered to the floor and slid under a table. This isn't about money, Shaq said quietly, his face just inches from Dax's now. This was never about money. Dax's bravado crumbled under the sheer presence of a man who had once dominated the biggest arenas in the world. His legs seemed to lose their strength, and he slid down the wall until he sat crumpled on the floor, breathing hard. For a brief moment, Shaq thought about all the men he had faced down in his life. 7-foot centers trying to block his path to the rim. Reporters trying to trap him with a hostile question. None of them had ever felt as fragile as this 20-year-old kid sitting on a dirty donut shop floor. His gun was kicked away, and his hands shook with something that looked a lot like relief. He had learned long ago that real strength rarely needed to prove itself loudly. The quietest room usually held the most powerful person in it. Tonight, that room was a donut shop. The quietest person in it had just stopped a bullet from ever being fired without throwing a single punch. Tyrell watched all of this happen, and something inside him finally broke. Not from fear, but from shame. He sank slowly to his knees, right there among the crushed donuts and scattered crumbs. I didn't know, Tyrell said, voice cracking. I didn't know it was you. I didn't know you were the one who. He couldn't finish the sentence. His hands were shaking now, not from adrenaline, but from something closer to grief. You didn't need to know who I was, Shaq said, kneeling down slowly to Tyrell's level, his knee protesting every inch of the movement. That was never the point. I've done terrible things, Tyrell said, staring at the floor. I scare people every single day. I threatened a kid's face, over $200. I put a gun near your ribs. I don't deserve. Stop, Shaq said gently, cutting him off. You don't get to decide what you deserve tonight. I do, and I say you get a second chance. Shaq reached out one massive hand and helped Tyrell up off the floor. Tyrell stood there, shaking, staring at this giant man who had every reason to walk away and call the police, yet chose something else entirely. Shaq bent down and picked up the one donut that had somehow survived the fall, unharmed inside a folded napkin. He held it out to Tyrell. Eat this, Shaq said. Then come with me. There are 42 kids waiting for breakfast, and I could use the help carrying boxes. Tyrell stared at the donut like it was the strangest object he had ever seen. Slowly, he took it, hands still trembling, and ate it, without saying another word. Leo finally exhaled, from behind the counter, his whole body sagging with relief. He started boxing up a fresh batch of donuts, 12 more this time, moving fast now, eager to help however he could. Dax sat against the wall, staring at his own hands like he didn't recognize them anymore. Silas stood near the door, unsure whether to run or stay. He watched his crew leader kneel in gratitude to a man he had tried to rob just minutes earlier. Silas had joined the Kings the same year as Tyrell. The two of them used to talk about getting out someday, finding real jobs, leaving the corner behind for good. Watching Tyrell rise from his knees now, something told Silas that day might finally be closer than he thought. Shaq turned to Dax. You've got a choice to make tonight, too. But that choice isn't mine to force on you. It's yours. He didn't wait for an answer. He simply picked up 2 fresh boxes of donuts from the counter, tucking them carefully under one massive arm, and nodded toward the door. Tyrell followed him outside, into the cold morning air, still shaken. He felt unsure of everything except one simple fact. He was still breathing, and that felt like a gift he hadn't earned. They loaded the boxes into the bed of the old Ford truck. Tyrell climbed into the passenger seat, feeling smaller than he had felt in years. He sat beside a man whose silence carried more weight than any threat he had ever made. The drive to Little Pebble's shelter took 11 minutes. Neither of them spoke much. Tyrell stared out the window, watching the streets he knew so well pass by like they belonged to somebody else's life now. When they pulled up outside the shelter, the porch light was already on. Sister Beatrice stood in the doorway, wrapped in a thick cardigan, waiting exactly like she said she would. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of Tyrell climbing out of the passenger seat, but she said nothing about it. She simply smiled at both of them and waved them inside. Kids were already stirring in the common room, some rubbing sleepy eyes, some already bouncing with morning energy. When Shaq walked in carrying boxes of donuts, a cheer rose up from a dozen small voices at once. "Big Shaq's here," one boy yelled, and soon they were all crowding around, reaching for donuts, laughing, forgetting entirely about the broken freezer and the sleepless night before. Tyrell stood off to the side at first, uncomfortable, watching this scene like it belonged to a different planet than the one he lived on. He had never seen this many kids this happy over something so small. A boy about 10 years old tugged on Shaq's tracksuit sleeve, staring up with wide eyes. "Are you really Shaq? My uncle has your jersey hanging in his garage." "I'm really Shaq," he said, crouching down low, so he wasn't towering quite so much over the boy. "But right now, I'm just the guy who brought breakfast." The boy grinned and ran off to tell his friends. Within seconds, 3 more kids had gathered around, asking questions about basketball, his shoe size, and whether he could dunk without jumping. Shaq answered every question patiently, his deep voice softening as he talked, his massive hands gentle as he passed out napkins and juice boxes. Sister Beatrice watched from the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, a small smile finally breaking across her tired face. The freezer would get fixed later that week, paid for quietly, through a maintenance fund nobody would ever trace back to a single donor. But that could wait. Right now, the only thing that mattered was 42 kids eating breakfast together, laughing, safe, and warm. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, walked right up to him and held out her hand for a donut. Tyrell hesitated, then knelt down and gave her one gently, careful not to crush it the way the first batch had been crushed. "Thank you, mister," she said simply, and skipped away with her prize. Tyrell stood there for a long moment, feeling something shift inside his chest, something he didn't have words for yet. For the first time in longer than he could remember, giving something away had felt better than taking it. Sister Beatrice approached Shaq near the doorway while the kids ate. "You didn't have to bring him," she said quietly, nodding toward Tyrell. "He needed this more than the kids did," Shaq said. "Sometimes the best gift you can give somebody is a reason to be better." Outside, dawn was starting to break over the rooftops of Newark, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. Shaq walked out to his old truck, climbed into the driver's seat, and sat there for a moment before starting the engine. He glanced back at the shelter one last time. He watched Tyrell through the window, still standing among the children, looking lost and found at the same time. Shaq started the truck and pulled away slowly. He left behind a changed man and a room full of laughing kids. Those kids would never know his name, his fortune, or his 4 championship rings. They would only remember that somebody big and quiet showed up when they needed him most. He carried donuts and dignity in equal measure, asking for nothing in return. Back at Rusty's Donuts, Leo locked up an hour later than usual, his hands finally steady again. He swept the last crumbs off the tile floor and thought about the strange night he had just lived through. He decided not to tell his manager everything. Some stories felt too big to explain in a shift report. He simply logged the register total and wiped down the counter one last time. Then he walked out into the same gray morning light, which now felt a little less heavy. Dax sat outside the shop on the curb for a long time after everyone else had left. He stared at his own reflection in a dark storefront window. He didn't go back to the corner that night. He didn't go back the next night either. Nobody ever found out exactly what changed in him. But 3 weeks later, he showed up at a community center near the shelter, asking about job training programs for warehouse work. Tyrell stayed at Little Pebbles shelter long after the sun came up. Most of the kids had already finished eating and wandered off to play. He helped Sister Beatrice wash dishes, dry them, and stack them back into cabinets that had seen better days. It was small work, the kind nobody would ever put in a headline, but it felt different from anything he had done in years. "You're welcome here anytime," Sister Beatrice told him as he finally prepared to leave. "Not because of who brought you, because of who you were this morning." She squeezed his hand once, a small gesture that carried more weight than any speech. Tyrell felt his throat tighten in a way it hadn't in years. Tyrell nodded, unable to find words that matched what he felt inside. He walked out into a Newark morning that looked exactly the same as the day before. Yet somehow, it felt completely different under his feet. He pulled out his phone and deleted 3 numbers he no longer wanted saved. Then he started walking home a different route, one that avoided the corner where the Kings gathered each night. As the sun rose fully over New Jersey, Shaq drove home alone. His knee still ached, his tracksuit was still cheap, but his heart felt a little lighter than the night before. He thought about his stepfather's words from all those years ago about bending low without losing your dignity. Tonight, he had watched a stranger learn that same lesson in real time. He pulled into his garage as the sky turned fully blue outside. He climbed out of the old Ford truck, patted its faded hood once, and walked back into his enormous, quiet house. It still felt too big for one man. But tonight, for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel quite as empty. Some victories never made the highlight reels. Some of the biggest wins happened quietly, in a donut shop at 2 a.m., where silence spoke louder than any scoreboard ever could.